Chapter 21. Goodbyes. Zach paced back and forth in front of the washroom block, hoping Noah and Hannah would show up before he had to leave. Uncle James was still showering. The plan was that when he came out, they would be leaving. They had 12 hours of driving ahead of them that day, which would only take them into Quebec, and that was only halfway home. The van was already loaded up and left running. Having jump-started the dead battery once already that morning, Uncle James didn't want to risk losing the charge. Looking at his watch, Zach saw that it was 5 to 7. Surely his friends would be coming soon. He wondered if he should go and wake them up.
"Hey, Zach,"
mumbled a weary voice. Turning around, Zach saw Noah. He was wearing his pajama pants and a large gray hoodie. 2 tired eyes peered out from under the hood. Flopping against Zach, he gave him a heavy hug.
"Goodbye, my friend,"
he said.
"But God willing, in a few short weeks, we'll meet again, either here or in Jerusalem." "In Jerusalem?"
Zach pondered, realizing that Noah was hoping Jesus would return very soon. He clapped his friend on the back.
"Thanks for everything this week,"
he said.
"You have no idea how much you've helped me."
Noah looked at him in a puzzled way.
"Helped?"
he questioned, and then he smiled.
"Oh yeah, I taught you how to fish and how to flip a canoe." "You did. And that charbroiled chicken was amazingly charred."
They both laughed. "Zach!" A girl's voice rang out. "I'm so glad you're still here." Zach's heart skipped a beat. Only 6 weeks ago he had thought that Melissa was the only girl in the world for him. Now he wasn't so sure. He turned in the direction of the voice as Hannah came running up to hug him. She was dressed in similar attire to Noah, except that her hoodie was purple. "My alarm didn't go off," she laughed as they embraced. "I planned to be up an hour ago. I would have been so upset if I'd missed you." At this point, Uncle James came out of the washroom looking fresh and clean.
"Ready to go, Zach?"
he called out. Zach nodded and then turned to his friends.
"Okay, contact details, everyone."
He passed them his information on slips of paper. Noah took the piece of paper from Zach and handed him a small piece of birch bark with his cell number and email address scrawled across it. It was barely readable.
"Would you like to decipher this for me?"
Zach teased. Noah read it out for him extra carefully. Hannah handed him a folded note. "Read it later on your trip," she smiled. "And this," she added, placing a white quartz rock into his hand, "is treasure from the shipwreck." Laughing, Zach clenched his fingers around the rock. There were many white quartz rocks on the beach, but this one was going to be extra special. He looked into her teasing blue eyes.
"It was not a shipwreck."
"It was a full-scale shipwreck," she giggled. Uncle James opened the sliding door of the van. Aunt Sandra and Esther climbed in. Zach gave Hannah and Noah one more hug each, and with a sad goodbye, reluctantly took a seat next to his sister. Uncle James tried unsuccessfully to get the sliding door shut. After fiddling with the latch and taking directions from Zach about where to find the magic spot that required a hip check, the door clicked tight. Zach and Esther waved out the windows until everyone was out of sight. Then they looked at each other sadly. "It's going to be a whole nother year till I see everyone again," Esther said despairingly.
"We have to talk them into coming out to see us,"
Zach decided, folding his arms across his chest.
"I'll work on that when I'm at conference."
"Lucky you," Esther replied. Only 14, Esther was too young to attend conference. Aunt Sandra liked Zach's idea. "We should plan a special week over the Christmas holidays, James," she suggested with excitement. "Then we could invite all the kids' friends to come and stay at our lodge." "Oh, that would be wonderful," Esther exclaimed. "We could have Bible talks at our ecclesial hall, skate on the lake, go cross-country skiing around your house."
"I'm sure we could fit 40 easily."
Uncle James nodded as they reached the outskirts of Minnemoya. He sped up when they reached the main highway. From there, the idea gathered momentum and kept their minds off the sad fact that, with the exception of Zach, they were heading far away from their friends for a long period of time. At noon, Uncle James and Aunt Sandra turned on the radio to hear the news. On Manitoulin Island, they'd enjoyed shutting out the world for a week, but now they wanted to catch up on everything that had happened.
"This just in,"
the CBC reporter was saying in a sober, incredulous way.
"California has been decimated by 2 major earthquakes overnight. Shortly after midnight, the first quake took place along the San Andreas fault line, only kilometers away from the city of Los Angeles. Measuring 8.5 on the Richter scale, the earthquake decimated the city. Los Angeles has been declared a state of emergency, with hundreds of collapsed buildings and many freeways destroyed. 8 hours later, a second quake with a magnitude of 6.3 occurred 100 kilometers off the coast of San Diego. Tsunami warnings are in effect all along the coastline, and evacuations are taking place immediately. There is no word yet on how many people have been killed, but estimates are in the thousands.
James, this is unreal, Aunt Sandra exclaimed. Uncle James looked over anxiously at his wife.
When is your brother getting back?
I don't know. I'm sure Lori was going to be in San Francisco this weekend. As they cruised along the highway, Zach listened intently to the conversation in the front seats. He had met Aunt Sandra's brother only once, briefly. Lawrence Carrington was CEO of the Sterling Bank in Nova Scotia. He was an incredibly busy man, constantly traveling from place to place. From what Zach had gleaned over the years, Aunt Sandra often tried, unsuccessfully, to include her brother in her life. He remembered hearing her say that if she had a visit with Lori once a year, she was doing well. Taking out her phone, Aunt Sandra sent her brother a text. To everyone's relief, he texted back to say his plane had been diverted to Las Vegas and he would soon be on his way home. "Oh, I'm so thankful," she told Uncle James. Nodding, Uncle James smiled and reached over to take his wife's hand.
You're a good sister, Butts. I just wish you had a more loving brother.
Aunt Sandra smiled appreciatively in her husband's direction. "That's okay," she replied. "God has given me you and your family. I'm perfectly content." As his aunt and uncle engaged in an endearing conversation, Zach gazed out his window at the ever-changing scenery. He wasn't sure why Aunt Sandra cared so much for a brother who never seemed to have time for anyone outside his business world. While he knew that Uncle James was very supportive of his wife's feelings for her brother, he also knew that his uncle was often frustrated with Lawrence Carrington's lack of response. Choosing to give his aunt and uncle some privacy and uninterested in listening to CBC's ever-falling stock exchange report, Zach looked over at Esther. She was asleep. He pulled Hannah's note out of his pocket. He wasn't ready to have anyone tease him about Hannah just yet. Opening it up discreetly, he read, "Zach, I'm glad we got to know each other better this year at camp. I'm going to miss you. I hope you remember to text me. Love, Hannah." At the bottom of the note, her contact details were written clearly in pink ink.
Hey, Zach,
Uncle James said as they came to a stop at a major intersection.
Did you hear that? Hear what?
Zach replied.
Remember that freak storm that blew through camp during the week? I'll never forget it.
Zach thought to himself, but to his uncle he only said,
Yes. They just said on the news that it turned into a massive tornado up north. A trailer park was decimated.
What unusual weather we've been having, Aunt Sandra declared as the light turned green and the old Bryant van lurched forward. In the last 5 years, we've had violent weather all over the globe.
What is God trying to tell us all? Uncle
James replied. Zach didn't say much, but he felt relieved he was making the choice to be baptized. Fluffing up his pillow, he laid his head against it and tucked the note into his pocket along with the special rock. 1 week at Bible camp just wasn't long enough. He could hardly wait to come back. Chapter 22. Time to Chat. The next morning, when Zach opened the window blind of their small motel room in Quebec, he looked out to see a cloudy gray morning and torrential rain.
I'll take the luggage out to the van,
Uncle James offered as he finished his complimentary breakfast in the small hotel and turned away from the TV screen. They had been watching the special report on the earthquake in California while eating pancakes and syrup. Tsunamis had reached the coast during the night and caused massive flooding and extensive damage in San Diego and all the way along the coastline. The flooding had halted the rescue attempts in Los Angeles. Video clips of crumbled office buildings and twisted lengths of pavement half submerged in murky seawater were staggering. $1-million houseboats, cars, and massive luxury liners were scattered like mangled toys across the flooded scene of destruction. Some people were still being pulled alive from the wreckage, but the death toll had reached 2,000 and was climbing steadily. While Zach's eyes were transfixed on the screen, there was a news flash of an upcoming special report on the FIBA Basketball World Cup to take place in Boston in 2 weeks' time.
That would be cool to watch,
Zach thought, but Uncle James was already standing up to leave.
I'll help you,
Zach said, standing up.
Thanks, Zach.
Uncle James smiled.
If you don't mind bringing the suitcases down from our rooms, I'll take them out to the van. There's no need for both of us to get wet in this deluge.
In about 10 minutes, all their luggage was loaded into the van. However, when everyone dashed from the motel into the vehicle, they realized that Uncle James was sitting in the driver's seat in very wet clothes. "James, you really should change," Aunt Sandra pleaded. "Why don't you run in and put on some dry clothes?"
"I'll be all right, darling,"
he said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Driving away from the motel, he explained,
"I don't want to get stuff out of my suitcase. Everything's packed in tight. Just turn on the heat and we'll be fine."
The heat doesn't work," Esther chimed in as they turned onto the highway. "This van is very old." "James," Aunt Sandra begged. But anxious to get back on the road, Uncle James couldn't be persuaded. As they sped down the highway, the heavy rain created foggy condensation on the windows. It was only a matter of minutes before Uncle James had to turn on the compressor. No one else minded the cool air blowing around since it was such a warm day, but no one realized how cold the air circulation felt to someone sitting in damp clothes. As the others read and discussed the Bible readings for the day, Zach noticed his uncle shiver. However, they were deep in conversation over a verse in Matthew 18, where Jesus says, "And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life with one eye, rather than having two eyes to be cast into hell fire." Uncle James asked Esther and Zach to come up with some practical applications of that verse. After all, it had been an important passage in the Bible talks that week. Zach struggled to think of an example that wouldn't impact his life too deeply. Esther was sitting beside him and might remind him later of what he had said. Esther, on the other hand, had plenty of examples and was not afraid to share. "Well, for some people like me, novels and magazines are a problem," she admitted. "If the things we are reading are causing us to dwell on sinful thoughts, then maybe we have to get rid of those books. If they are in our home, they will always be there tempting us to read them again." Aunt Sandra agreed with Esther and encouraged her to fill the void with books that would be helpful and encouraging. She reminded her niece of the passage in Philippians 4, verse 8 that says, "Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things." Zach was quite happy when everyone forgot that he still hadn't come up with an example. He shrewdly turned their attention to the next few verses about the lost sheep. Uncle James reminded them that when Luke recorded the lost sheep parable, he added Jesus' words,
"There is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." God doesn't want one little one to be lost.
Zach reflected, looking at the passage.
There is joy in heaven when one sinner repents. This could be me. Is there rejoicing in heaven right now because I'm making the decision to turn my life around?
It was powerful to consider that his decision could have an impact above. Then he pondered it all a little further.
Are there other little ones that God wants found? Are there other lost sheep?
He knew that there were, right in his own youth group back home, and those lost sheep were his friends. Suddenly Esther remarked, "I've got it!" "Got what?" "It all just came together for me," she said excitedly to Aunt Sandra. "Do you remember on our way to camp we talked about doing good deeds?" Everyone nodded. "And then you just reminded me that if I give up novels, I should fill the void with good material, which reminded me of the classes Uncle George gave this week. He told us that to overcome evil, we need to focus on doing good. So I just thought that perhaps if we're filling our lives with doing good things for God to say thank you to Him for the gift of salvation, it will help us to crowd out the evil that wants to pull us in the other direction." Aunt Sandra and Uncle James were happy to see Esther's enthusiasm.
"You're thinking it through all right."
Uncle James smiled. "I like that," Aunt Sandra agreed, reaching over to squeeze Esther's hand. "When we fill our lives with service to God, we don't have time to get into trouble."
"Just don't think that sin won't find its way in the back door somehow,"
Uncle James cautioned.
"However, I believe what you're saying is scriptural. Doesn't it say something like that in Galatians chapter 6, Butts?"
Aunt Sandra found the passage and read it out. "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. And let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, and especially to those who are of the household of faith."
There it is.
Uncle James nodded.
Doing good is sowing to the Spirit, which reaps eternal benefit in our character development and spiritual growth. Sowing to the flesh leads to corruption.
A couple of hours later, after Uncle James had sneezed several times in a row, Aunt Sandra insisted that he pull over at the next gas station and change. That he did, and they carried on with Uncle James in dry clothing, but the sneezing continued.
So, Zach,
Uncle James said as they drove along a straight stretch of highway,
since you've requested baptism, why don't you and I go over the important things of the gospel message and just see if you're ready? We have a good 10 hours ahead of us.
Zach was happy to use the time efficiently and took out his Bible. In between plenty of sniffling and a few sneezing attacks, Uncle James quizzed Zach on all the first principle teachings in the Bible. They went through everything that Zach would be asked in a baptismal confession of faith.
What causes us to sin?
Uncle James asked.
Our lusts.
Zach replied.
Do you a passage for that?
Zach thought hard.
There is one in the Epistle of James. What does it say?
Looking it up, Zach found the passage in the very first chapter, verse 14.
But each one is tempted when he is drawn away of his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. That is a really important passage to remember.
His uncle nodded, keeping his eyes on the road.
That passage also shows us that temptation itself isn't sin. We sin when we give in to the temptation.
Pausing first to blow his nose on a tissue that Aunt Sandra had handed him, Uncle James asked,
Are there any other places where we learn that sin comes from our hearts?
Esther found a few verses in Matthew 15, which said, But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. Aunt Sandra quoted Jeremiah 17, verses 9 to 10. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I, Yahweh, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doings. Taking it to the next level, Uncle James asked Zach to read Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. He then gave him a challenging question.
How did Jesus, in his death, destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil?
While they sped down the wide, straight highway towards Nova Scotia, it took a few references in Romans to work out the answer. The book of Romans deals extensively with the problem of sin and death. Looking at chapters 5 and 6, they collected some important points, such as, through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned. They found a chapter where sin is spoken of as a king that reigns unto death. Zach discovered verses which say we can choose to be slaves of sin and earn the wages of death, or servants of righteousness and be given the gift of eternal life in Christ Jesus. Trying to summarize the information, Zach said,
It seems that similar analogies are used for both sin and the devil. The devil has the power of death. Sin reigns unto death and pays wages of death. They seem to be spoken of interchangeably. So how did Jesus destroy the devil in his death? Well, in at least two ways.
Zach replied.
He never gave in to sin during his life, therefore he didn't deserve the wages of death. And when he died on the cross, his human nature died also, of course, and never tempted him again. He was made immortal when he rose from the dead. I would agree.
Uncle James nodded.
Jesus' human nature was a source of temptation for him, just as it is for us. Because Jesus never sinned, the grave could not hold him. And now, those who are associated with Christ through baptism can have their sins forgiven. God is determined that his Son's faithful sacrifice breaks the hold that sin and death has on believers. Instead of God's creation being destroyed by sin, sin has been destroyed by Christ.
The conversation carried on for hours, and Zach wrote down many passages on the back page of his Bible. He asked questions, too, clarifying certain matters that were still confusing to him. Even Esther joined in on the conversation. The time went by quickly, and soon they were crossing into Nova Scotia. Chapter 23. Repentance. Uncle James' cold worsened as they drove home on the familiar highways. Finally, he asked Aunt Sandra to drive while he took a nap. Esther moved up to the passenger seat to talk to Aunt Sandra, and Uncle James slumped into the seat beside Zack. Propping pillows up against the window, he was soon sound asleep and snoring heavily. With a few hours driving left and his uncle in need of peace and quiet, Zack had plenty of time to think. He knew that the decision he was planning to make would require a lot of changes. His relationships with Melissa and his parents would need to change. He had to pull back in his pursuit of Melissa, and he had to change his attitude toward his dad. Lately, he and his dad had become increasingly antagonistic, and Zack knew it was partly his fault for the downward spiral.
It's going to be difficult to make changes with my dad,
he felt resentfully.
It's going to be really hard to admit I've been wrong. I feel like he owes me an apology for treating me like a child and never being around to do anything fun. But I know Mom and Dad are only trying to keep us safe from evil. It's not like they're spending all their time on themselves. Everyone in the ecclesia seems to need them. They help a lot of people. I don't like the way they're always suspicious of my motives and whether I'm telling the truth. But I guess I've given them plenty of reasons to doubt.
Deep down, Zack knew that his rebellion had caused his dad to lose faith in his son's ability to make good decisions. Lies and deceit had often seemed a shortcut to freedom, but they had done deep damage to a true open spirit of trust.
It's going to be hard to say sorry,
he mused.
But I know it's something I have to do. God says I need to honor my parents.
However, the longer Zack imagined himself asking for forgiveness, the easier it became in his mind.
I hope I can do it as soon as I get home,
he pondered.
I need to start off right, before things have a chance to go wrong.
It was late when Aunt Sandra drove up to the twins' home in Sterling, Nova Scotia. Zack's dad was still up and came out to help sort through the luggage and exchange vehicles. Uncle James was very tired, sneezing and coughing intermittently. They said quick goodbyes, and then Aunt Sandra drove off to take her sick husband home. Zack's dad turned to Esther first.
Good to see you back, honey,
he said cheerfully. Giving Esther a big squeeze, he then turned to hug Zack. As it had been for the last couple of years, the hug seemed distant and forced. Zack felt resentment welling up inside him again. There was no doubt in his mind that his dad loved Esther, and that Jake was his favorite son. It made him angry that his dad didn't seem to care for him as much, even though Zack knew he had pushed his father away many times.
Hi, Dad,
Zack said evenly, returning the distant hug. He swallowed hard. Inside was a strong desire to stay aloof, play it cool, and immediately retire to his room for the night.
No, I've got to do this,
Zack told himself.
I've got to do it tonight. Dad, I need to talk to you,
he mumbled. His father looked surprised.
Right now, Zack? It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, I know.
Zack sighed.
Maybe,
he argued with himself.
It can wait till tomorrow.
Night, Dad, Esther called out, heading up the stairs. We had a fantastic time. I'll tell you all about it in the morning.
Night, Esther,
Zack's dad said affectionately.
I'm looking forward to a full report. I'm sure if Esther wanted to talk now, Dad wouldn't complain.
Zack thought unhappily.
You need to talk to me, Zack. Yes, I do.
His dad motioned toward the living room, and they both sat down on the mismatched couches facing one another.
What's up?
he asked.
Is something wrong? No,
Zack replied.
I had a great week at camp.
Even such a simple admission was difficult at first. However, it spurred him on.
I guess it's what I needed. A chance to get away from everything and time to think. The talks were great. My friends were great. I wish I could have stayed there for the rest of the summer. If you want to go back out, Zack, we'll find a way.
There was no mistaking the loving support his father was willing to give him. Maybe apologizing wouldn't be so hard after all.
I'd really like to go to the youth conference,
Zack said.
I know it's a lot of Bible study, but I think it will be good for me. I think I need it.
There was a happy, surprised smile on his father's face.
Zack, I'm pleased to hear that,
he said.
Let me know if you need any assistance. Thanks,
Zack replied gratefully. Now it was time for the tough part. Zack took a deep breath.
Look, Dad,
he said.
I've made a big decision. No, a huge decision to change my life. I'm really sorry for all the trouble I've caused you lately. I was chasing the world, and now I want to get baptized as soon as possible.
It was rare for Zach's dad to be speechless. For a moment or two, his dad looked at him, his disbelief slowly giving place to joy.
Zach,
he said, standing up and holding out his arms. Moving forward, Zach gave his father a hug.
Zach,
his father said again with the utmost sincerity, holding his son tight in a warm embrace.
I am overjoyed. Mom and I will do whatever we can to help you. This is wonderful news. Thanks, Dad,
Zach mumbled gratefully.
I'm sorry for all the trouble I've caused.
Holding his son at arm's length, he said,
Thank you for your apology. I appreciate it. We have had some tough times, you and I. I'm sorry for the harsh words I've spoken. Sometimes I've been too quick to react without knowing the full story. That's okay. So have I. You know that Mum and I have felt a lot of anxiety about you because we love you and want you to be a part of God's promises. I'm so thankful you went to camp. I wish Jake had gone with you. But then again, I wish we'd all gone.
There was a deep look of concern in his father's eyes as he spoke of Jake. Zach was surprised.
Maybe he'll come to conference with me,
he suggested.
He needs to get away as much as I did. I hope you can talk him into it,
his dad said in a dubious tone.
What's up with Jake?
Zach wondered. Was something wrong? Chapter 24. Catching Up.
Hey, Zach, you getting up for work? Is it that time already?
Zach groaned, rolling over and pulling the pillow off his head. Sunlight was streaming into their disheveled bedroom. Suitcases and camping gear still needed to be sorted out and put away. Squinting, Zach looked up sleepily at his brother. Jake was looking down at him with impatience in his hazel brown eyes. He was already dressed in tattered jean shorts and an old red t-shirt.
We're supposed to meet Alan in half an hour. We've got all the lawns to cut today.
Zach skipped a shower and headed out to the car with his brother, carrying a bowl of cereal.
So, was it good?
Jake asked, after Zach had given thanks for his morning meal.
Fantastic,
he replied as Jake backed out of the garage.
Really? What was so great? The talks really made me think. A lot. That was probably the best part. I've decided to get baptized. Seriously?
Jake replied, turning out of the driveway and onto the main road.
Whoa, I sure didn't see that coming. That's amazing.
Zach nodded as Jake accelerated quickly.
I know. My life is going to have to change. I told Dad about it last night. I want to get baptized as soon as I can. Cool.
Jake's excitement seemed feigned. Shoveling in a spoonful of soggy cereal, Zach looked over at him with a puzzled expression.
How's Brennan and Noah and all the rest? They were totally disappointed you weren't there, especially since I couldn't play sports. Noah and Brennan were counting on one of us playing in the volleyball tournament with them.
Jake nodded slowly.
Yeah, that would have been fun. Hannah was disappointed too.
Zach added guardedly. He spooned in another mouthful of cereal. Jake laughed.
Did she follow you around all week? Hannah's a really nice girl.
Zach replied evenly, looking away.
Nicer than Melissa?
Jake asked, trying not to sound too hopeful.
By far.
Was his brother's surprising admission.
By far?
Jake echoed. He suddenly realized he was way over the speed limit and took his foot off the accelerator. Zach decided he'd better not say too much about Hannah. There was only one Hannah, and he didn't want to share.
I actually got really close to everyone this year,
he said, and then he added sadly,
I didn't want to come home. I'm planning to go back out for the conference. I'll ask Alan about getting a ride today. Jake, we have so many good friends that go to that camp. Friends that believe the same as we do. You need to come too. You'll love it. What? We can't take more weeks off work. Who's going to help Derek run Eden Tree when Alan's away?
Zach shrugged. He hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, maybe you're right,
he moaned. But then suddenly he had an idea.
Hey, maybe Jaden will help.
The idea was a good one. Jaden was a good worker, and he had been unable to get a job for the summer because he had been so busy fundraising for his mission trip to Uganda at the end of July. Jaden was planning to only be gone for a week, and the twins knew he would be keen to make some pocket money when he returned.
Sometimes we're just too busy, Jake. We haven't been taking time for God.
Jake looked at his brother strangely. It had always been his job to admonish his younger brother, not the other way around. After all, he was the older brother, not only naturally, but spiritually. He knew he should feel happy that his brother had this radical change of heart, but he didn't. He felt resentment and anger.
You don't sound like Zach,
he said with a skeptical tone.
I hope I don't. I want to change.
Zach paused to slurp down the remaining milk from the bowl.
So how was your week? I'm really glad I went,
Jake exclaimed.
There's nothing like training with professional coaches. I learned so much. And now I feel like I'm in better shape than ever. My ankle is completely fine. I'll have to fill you in on some of the new plays. We learned this amazing press break. I'm going to tell Brett all about it after work today. And you should see Jaden shoot foul shots now. He hardly misses, ever. And I'm up to 80% average myself.
Envious feelings were leaching into Zach's heart. He knew it was going to be hard to hear about the basketball camp and all that Jake had experienced.
Heavenly Father, please help me.
He prayed silently.
Don't let me get swallowed back into this again. One night we had a captain's meeting,
Jake went on to say.
All the captains were invited. I wish you'd been there. I can't remember everything, but it was really important stuff about leading a team. Like what? Well, we watched some videos of actual NBA games, and the coaches pointed out the difference that some of the captains made to the team. Positive captains kept everyone's head in the game, even when things were going bad. A bad captain can defeat the morale of the whole group if he lets himself get down. Good leadership can make the difference between winning and losing. Yeah, I can see that. So, if you and I keep up our confidence next season, regardless of how the game is going, we can make the difference in a close game. We can affect the morale of everyone for good. I guess that's true with leadership in any situation. Yeah, perhaps.
Jake mumbled, wondering where Zach was heading with such a comment. Then it dawned on him, and he quickly pushed the thought away.
I have 2 new things to show you when we do our workout tonight,
he added rapidly.
They really help with jumping and making your shots. It's fun. You'll like it. How am I going to fit in a workout and Bible study?
Zach was asking himself. Noah had told him to do it as soon as he got home, but that's when he and Jake always worked out. There was supper and the family Bible readings to fit in as well, and he didn't really want to be jogging around town in the dark.
Oh, I can be flexible,
he told himself.
I'll do my workouts with Jake as usual, and my Bible studies in the evenings. Sounds good.
Zach smiled.
I do feel out of shape, but since I'm going to the conference, I have to get the workbook done in the next 5 weeks. So every night I'll be working on it till I go to bed. Are you serious?
Jake replied. Checking his speed, he slowed the car down again.
You could do it with me,
Zach suggested.
I'm on summer holidays, bro.
Jake complained.
I don't want to be sitting at a desk studying all night. I get enough of that in school.
They were both quiet for a few minutes. Zach tossed his bowl and spoon on the floor in the back of the car, and Jake concentrated on making a left-hand turn at a busy intersection.
You might want to leave yourself a spare evening every now and again,
Jake said with a mysterious smile. Turning onto a side road, Jake proudly told his brother.
I picked up a loaded laptop at the basketball camp. One of the guys forgot it in the cabin, and I found it. Shouldn't you be trying to contact him and let him know you have it? I don't know his last name yet,
Jake replied in a nonchalant manner.
We'll see them when basketball season starts up again. I'll give it to him then. What's it loaded with? Fantastic movies. Movies? Great movies. And make sure you keep it a secret. If I keep the laptop hidden, then you and I can watch it anytime we want in our room. No more waiting till Mom and Dad are out of the house. Amazing,
was Zach's initial response, and then he began to question.
Do I really want to go behind Mom and Dad's back again? Is it right for us to keep someone else's laptop? How will I ever stick to my resolve with a loaded laptop in our room?
Zach felt uneasy. The thought of trying to focus on Bible study while Jake was lying in bed watching a cool movie seemed incredibly daunting.
Anyway,
Zach added as they reached the first place on the lawn mowing schedule.
I'm going to invite Melissa and Shane and Jaden to my baptism. Think they'll come? Maybe,
Jake replied, parking the car.
Melissa has been texting me a lot since you've been gone. Half the time she's wondering what you're up to. She told me to tell you she's breaking up with Shane, and she misses you a lot. Really?
Zach said slowly in a rather stunned way. It wasn't the excited reaction Jake expected. He hoped it meant Zach wasn't interested in Melissa anymore. Jake wanted to put his brother's feelings to the test. Maybe his brother was willing to switch girls.
Melissa wants us to see Colorado with her. It's this new movie that just came out. She's heard it's really good.
Looking sideways at his brother, he added,
But I guess you're going to be too busy doing Bible study.
Zach swallowed hard as he got out of the car. It was his first day back from camp, and already he was facing intense pressure to forget changing and revert back to living for the pleasures of the moment. Melissa was breaking up with Shane? She was missing him? This was going to be harder than he thought. Could he handle sitting alone at home while Jake took Melissa to the movies? He lashed out.
What's up with you, man? You should be happy that I've changed and try to help me stick to it, not do everything you can to knock me back down.
Jake was surprised by his brother's outburst.
I'm totally happy for you,
he exclaimed angrily, just as Derek and Alan pulled into the driveway with the garden trailer in tow.
Why would you think I'm not? But you don't have to become a fanatic just because you're getting baptized.
Alan and Derek stepped out of the truck, greeting the twins with a hearty hello. They ambled over to help them take the lawnmowers off the trailer.
I heard you're looking for a ride to conference,
Alan said to Zach.
I got 3 spare seats. I'm happy to take you. Jake too if he wants. I hope you don't mind, though, if we stay for the week after conference as well. That would be amazing.
Zach grinned, feeling encouraged.
I'd love to stay on. Noah invited me to stay at his place. Who's going to run Eden Tree?
Jake retorted.
Derek has a friend who's been doing landscaping this summer.
Alan told him.
I said we'd give him a couple of weeks off in September if he'll do our customers while we're away. But we're back at school in September.
Jake protested.
It might be tricky.
Alan agreed.
But I figure for 2 weeks we can all cram in working 3 hours every night and all day Saturday. And I have a couple of university friends who will gladly do some extra work if we need them. I'm sure Jaden would love some work.
Zach added.
Yeah, Jaden's a good guy.
Alan considered.
Don't worry about it. We'll manage somehow.
Jake thought through the options.
1 week sure made a big difference for Zach. I'm probably in need of a spiritual boost myself. Maybe this is my second chance.
But then he shook his head.
I'd consider it,
he told Alan.
If there wasn't so much Bible study to do first, I'd never get through it in only 5 weeks. Sure you could.
Alan encouraged him.
It took me about 50 hours. If you do about 2 hours a day from here on in, you'll get through it easily. And you can always finish it off on the 24-hour car ride to camp.
Filling his mower with gas, Jake shook his head again.
I'd have no life for the rest of summer. What you'd have,
Alan persisted,
is a lot of help from God in transforming your mind. I've learned so much from that study. If we did it together, it would be fun,
Zach suggested. As Jake pushed the mower up and down the sloping hills of the estate, he thought about what Alan had said.
Maybe this is what I need,
he thought.
Maybe I'm not feeling anything because I'm not making any effort to seek God. But I've got to stay in shape,
he argued.
That week at camp was great, and I want to keep up my training till the season begins. Plus, Melissa is showing some interest. I don't want to bury my head at home for 5 weeks like Zach is planning to do. Plus, I wouldn't have time to watch movies.
It was one last thought, however, that clinched his decision.
If Zach and Alan are going to be away for 2 whole weeks, they'll be missing out on making almost $1,000. That's a lot of money.
Alan whipped around the trees, Derek looked after the gardens, and Zach mowed the lawn. Zach was thinking hard about his brother's comments.
Am I becoming a fanatic?
He considered.
Yeah, probably announcing that I'm going to be doing Bible study every night sounds that way. But if I want to go to youth conference, which I do, I really have no choice. It's the only way I'll get it all done. He
sighed with regret.
Had I started when Alan first told me about it, it wouldn't have been so hard at all. I wasted so much time with that musical.
It was after 5 when they got home from work. Jake was anxious to show Zach the new workout. They changed quickly, grabbed a banana and a yogurt, and headed outside.
I hope you found something to improve our vertical,
Zach said, inhaling the contents of the yogurt container in one gulp.
Sure did,
Jake exclaimed.
We had a guy at camp who used to play in the NBA, and he coached Canada's national men's team too. I asked him for the best jumping exercise. Really?
Zach said, impressed by the qualifications.
What did he say? It was profound,
Jake teased.
He said that the best thing to do to strengthen jumping muscles was to jump. Whoa, that's deep. Seriously though, I'll show you what he made us do,
Jake said, flinging his banana peel into the garbage can. He took up a position on the paved driveway under the basketball net.
Jump and touch the rim 10 times,
he said, hurling himself off the ground.
And then we'll run up and down the little hill over there, then 9 jumps, and a hill run, then 8, all the way down to 1.
The boys eagerly started the drill. By 9 jumps, their legs were aching.
My legs are killing me. This better work,
Zach complained.
It will,
said Jake.
My vertical improved by 5 centimeters in just 1 week of camp.
After the last hill run, the boys collapsed on the grass to catch their breath. It had been all Zach could do to keep up to his brother. As he lay panting on the grass, he hoped Jake's next drill wouldn't be so intense.
I've got the best shooting drill you've ever seen,
Jake boasted.
It's called 33.
Once he had recovered a little more, Jake grabbed a ball and took his position along the baseline facing the net.
So, you start here.
Jake began, jumping in place just beyond the 3-point line that they had painted on the driveway.
You shoot and follow through to get your rebound.
Making the play, Jake grabbed the ball after it swished to the net and said,
That's 3 points.
Running back to where he started, Jake faked the shot, took one hard dribble, and nailed a 2-pointer.
That's another 2 points.
He told Zach.
Go get your rebound again, and the last shot is a layup.
He returned to where he started, up-faked, and then drove hard to the hoop and laid it in.
The layup is only worth 1 point in this drill,
he said as he caught the rebound. Jake took his position at a 45-degree angle from the basket, still beyond the 3-point line.
Now we do it all over again from here.
Finding the bottom of the net with his 3-pointer, he missed his 2-pointer and dunked the ball hard on his layup.
So that's 10 points for me so far. The next spot is from straight on, and then you repeat the same thing from the left side.
Jake continued the drill, making most of his shots. Zach razzed him for missing a left-handed layup. After finishing the baseline drive, Jake was at 24 out of 30 possible points.
So why is the drill called 33?
Zach asked.
Because you finished with 3 foul shots.
Jake hit all 3 easily.
Wow, you've been working on your free throws, bro.
Zach marveled.
So, I got 27 points.
Jake said.
That's 3 off my best score at camp. Now it's your turn.
Zach had difficulties on his first turn, trying to remember when to shoot, when to fake and drive, and where the position for each shot was supposed to be. He only scored 18 points.
That was awful,
he moaned.
Don't worry. Once you get it, you can just shoot away without thinking. That's the key. The camp coaches were always preaching. Don't think too much, just let it flow.
The boys played 33 until their mom gave them a 10-minute warning. It was almost time for dinner. Although they never beat Jake's high score from camp, they enjoyed themselves immensely. Zach felt the drill had good potential.
Next time we should bring a stopwatch and time ourselves as well as keep score,
Zach suggested, as they took positions on the grass for 10 minutes of strength training.
Great idea,
Jake exclaimed between push-ups.
The time can be the tiebreaker in case we get the same number of points. Yeah, and let's keep track of how we do each day.
Zach puffed, trying to keep up with his brother.
I'm going to make 33 one day,
he thought to himself.
This is really good.
Chapter 25. Taken Down. Alan had to make a trip to the plant nursery the next morning to pick up some new trees for a customer. He told the twins to sleep in and meet him for work at noon. The boys enjoyed the late start and the time to eat a larger breakfast. As they stood around the stove waiting for the bacon to crisp up, Zach asked Jake to send 2 very important messages to Hannah and Noah. The first message was,
Hey, it's Zach. How's it going? Got back from camp safe? How about you?
It wasn't long before a message came back from Hannah. So good to hear from you, Zach. I'm hoping to get baptized in 2 weeks, God willing. What about you? Unsure of what to say, Zach asked Jake to text the second number with a similar message. This time, there wasn't an instant response. Walking into the kitchen, the twins' father turned on the 9 o'clock news. The lead story was about the potential collapse of the United States economy.
Trillions of dollars in debt,
the reporter was saying.
The economy has reached its breaking point. All non-essential services will be shut down in 2 weeks' time. Expect long delays at the border, hospitals, and any government office. Consider alternative methods of shipping. Postal backlogs will get out of hand. For the foreseeable future, military spending has been slashed. The U.S. will defend its own borders only. That fits nicely with Ezekiel 38.
Their father commented.
The young lions watch the northern invasion and are powerless to respond. Perhaps a financial crisis is the way that God intends to tie their hands.
Zach and Jake looked at one another. A financial crisis in the English-speaking world sounded unpleasant. They hoped their father was wrong. Sitting down at the table with a cup of coffee in his hand, their dad said,
I was talking to your Uncle James last night, Zach. He says he had long talks with you on the way home, going over all the important teachings of the Bible. He feels that you're ready for baptism. Can I be baptized this Sunday? It's good to see your enthusiasm.
His dad chuckled.
But why don't you give it a month or two, and just make sure this isn't a rash decision. Making a commitment like this to God is something you want to be very sure about. Dad, I'm absolutely sure,
Zach replied firmly, flipping the bacon.
I've done a lot of thinking about it, and I know I'm ready. You're ready to give your life, your heart, and your mind to God? You're ready to be a new man in Christ? I am, Dad.
Zach nodded.
I know what this commitment means. That's why I've taken so long to make it. Following Christ isn't the path of least resistance, you know, but it's the path of least regrets.
Zach finished with a smile. Not having seen the gradual change in Zach during the week he had been at Bible camp, Andrew was a little skeptical. However, after questioning him concerning the new way of life for a disciple in Christ, Zach's unwavering responses persuaded his father that his son's change of heart was sincere. They both agreed to aim toward a baptism in 2 weeks' time.
Hannah's hoping to be baptized then as well.
His dad looked puzzled.
Hannah Vandenberg? Yes.
Zach smiled, taking the bacon out of the pan.
Hannah Vandenberg, Noah's sister, Esther's good friend. Is that right?
His dad said with amazement.
Wonderful. Hannah is a really nice girl. And, by the way, Dad,
Zach added, suddenly remembering,
Noah might be going to Dalhousie in September. If he doesn't choose to do missionary work instead, could he board with us? Of course. That would be really nice for you and Jake. Great,
Zach exclaimed with a smile.
Can you let him know?
He asked his brother. Jake sent another text to the non-responsive friend as Zach cracked eggs into the frying pan.
My dad says you can stay here if you go to Dalhousie. Noah might be coming here?
Jake thought to himself.
That will change things.
After his father had made a few phone calls to arrange for Zach's interview and probable baptism, the boys sat down to eat breakfast. Zach was munching on a perfectly crisp piece of bacon when his mom entered the kitchen. How's James? She questioned her husband quietly.
No better,
His dad remarked with a serious tone.
He couldn't talk long on the phone. It was aggravating his cough. Sandra says he'll be off work again today. She's going to take him to see the doctor this afternoon.
Oh, good. He probably needs a dose of antibiotics. Zach could tell his parents were rather concerned that Uncle James had a cold, and he wondered why. Who worried about a cold in the middle of summer? It would soon be over and gone. With Jake's help, he sent a text to Hannah.
Hey, sounds like I might be baptized the same day as you.
We'll be twins, she texted back. Jake looked up to see the smile on Zach's face.
He really likes this girl,
he thought.
What did I miss out at camp? Is Hannah really better than Melissa? By far?
With a laugh, Zach told Jake to type.
Sweet.
It was sweet. It was moral support. The only drawback was that now there was no chance that Hannah and Noah would be coming out to Nova Scotia to see his baptism.
Oh well.
He shrugged.
Alan and I will soon be back in Ontario.
The next 3 days passed quickly as Zach diligently followed his new routine. Get out of bed in the morning, pray, work for Eden Tree till 5, come home, do the new workout with Jake, eat dinner, do the Bible readings with his family, and then sit down to do the youth conference book for 2 to 3 hours. It was a very busy schedule, and Zach's legs ached from the drills Jake was putting him through. But the study on Job was more interesting than he had anticipated. He had always wondered about the Satan in the book of Job, and now he was finally taking the time to investigate.
It's so strange,
he thought,
because after the first 2 chapters, Satan disappears from the record. In fact, in the rest of the book, all the calamities that come upon Job are attributed as coming from God. Who is this Satan? Did he have any powers of his own? It seems he has to get God's permission to do anything to Job, and God takes responsibilities for all the affliction Job suffers.
He thought it over carefully.
I know that the Hebrew word Satan means an opponent or an adversary, And sometimes it's even translated using those words. Maybe I'll find something there.
Looking up the Hebrew word Satan, Strong's number 7854, Zach scrolled through all the places 7854 appeared in the Old Testament. The first passage in the listing was one where a divine angel stood in Balaam's way as Satan, or as it is translated in the New King James, as an adversary against him, to keep Balaam from sinning against God. In the next passage, David was referred to as being a possible adversary to the Philistines. Several other passages in the listing were clearly human adversaries, and some were ambiguous.
So, Satan is someone who opposes or is adversarial to another, for good or for bad.
Zach considered.
The angel that stood in Balaam's way was a Satan for good, as he stopped Balaam from going to Balak without God's permission. But in the New Testament, Jesus calls Peter Satan because he was trying to talk Jesus out of giving his life for the world.
Turning back to the book of Job, Zach considered the various suggestions he'd heard for the identification of Job's Satan.
Was Satan a divine angel that wanted God's permission to test Job's faith? There certainly are other incidents where angels are involved in bringing calamity on the earth and testing the faith of believers. Or was Satan another human being who was jealous of Job? Was he one of the three friends? Or maybe all three of them? After all, it was the words of Job's friends that caused Job to charge God foolishly, not the afflictions. And God rebuked only the three friends at the end of the book, not anyone else. Or maybe,
Zach thought,
maybe the answer lies in identifying the sons of God who were with Satan in the opening chapter.
While he was looking up other places where the phrase sons of God appears in Scripture, his mum came into the kitchen where Zach was studying. She was talking to someone on the phone about an event and began leafing through the calendar. Zach was distracted. He couldn't help noticing the circled dates of the musical. 7 weeks had passed since the final performance, and although he didn't know it, there were only 4 weeks left until life would change forever. Remembering back to the performance, Zach thought to himself,
Everything revolved around the musical back then. Nothing else mattered except putting on a great show and getting Melissa's attention. Jake thinks I'm being fanatical with Bible study, but at least this new routine is helping me to let go of the old life and change things around. If I had as much free time as Jake, I might be fanatical about something else, like I was before with Melissa and the musical. Where did that get me? Beat up and running away from God.
He flipped through the unfinished pages. He had only just begun, and there was still a lot left to do, but Zach was determined he would be going back to Manitoulin Island. For the first week and a half, Zach worked in the kitchen so the light wouldn't keep his brother from sleeping and his brother wouldn't distract him from studying. However, on Wednesday night, the night just before his baptismal interview, Esther decided to make up for 2 weeks of missed piano practice, all at once. So Zach picked up his books and went to his room. Jake was lying on his bed reading a scary-looking novel. A pair of evil eyes looked through a keyhole dripping with blood.
How can you study for so long?
Jake asked his brother after a while.
It's like you're back at school.
Zach looked up reproachfully. Jake was certainly not supportive, and Zach found his brother's hostile reaction strange.
Where's the brother who used to encourage me to try harder? Jake has always been the good son, the one making the right decisions. Sure, he has a few areas of weakness, but for the most part he's always led in a good direction. Is he taking a summer break from God? This is way more interesting than schoolwork,
Zach told him.
I'm finding all these cool links to the life of Job. Did you know that almost everything that happened to Job was part of the curse that God said he would put on Israel for their disobedience? There are so many links back to Deuteronomy 28. It's almost like Job is a type of the nation of Israel. Listen to this comment.
Zach proceeded to read a few lines from the workbook with excitement.
The book of Job was likely written near the end of Israel's wandering in the wilderness, perhaps around the same time that Moses proclaimed the words of Deuteronomy 28 to the nation. This prophecy stated that Israel would be blessed for righteousness and cursed for disobedience. While this held true nationally, it could be misunderstood on a personal level. With all the allusions back to Deuteronomy 28, Job's friends seem to have been well aware of the prophecy and made incorrect deductions. They concluded that if someone were struck with calamity, it demonstrated the person had sinned. The greater the calamity, the greater the sin. In looking at Job's suffering with this mindset, they were convinced that he must have been the worst of sinners. God worked with Job and his friends to demonstrate that this was not a fair assumption to make toward Job or anyone else that suffers. Regardless of the circumstances we find ourselves in, we must always speak right of God.
Jake felt uneasy with his brother's enthusiasm.
How can Zach be so turned on by the Bible?
He wondered. It was one thing to choose to do the right thing because you knew it was expected of you, but Zach seemed strangely excited about it. Jake couldn't imagine ever feeling so excited about the Bible. Since his baptism, he had led dutifully, if somewhat grudgingly, in spiritual matters, but never with enthusiasm. Instead of being encouraged by his brother's change of heart, Jake felt only guilty and resentful.
Why isn't Zach as passionate about basketball and the championship anymore?
He wondered.
Why isn't he still crazy about Melissa? Why didn't he even ask what my new novel is about? How come he hasn't started reading Green Diamonds? I gave it to him before he went away. How could 1 week make such a difference? Would I be this excited about the Bible if I'd gone to Manitoulin? Maybe I should go to the conference. Maybe it would change me.
He looked at the thickness of the workbook Zach was writing in.
But it's so much work.
He sighed internally.
This is my vacation. And I'm already hours behind what he has done. I could never catch up unless I took the next 2 weeks off of work. I can't imagine spending 2 weeks at a desk in the summer. So, do you mind if I take Melissa to the movies?
Jake asked in a nonchalant manner.
Like, I don't want to move in on your girl or anything, but if you're not interested in her anymore... She was never my girl.
Zach reminded him uneasily.
Are you sure she's actually broken up with Shane? No, but she plans to. Shane's been working all summer, and he's heading off to university in the fall, all the way to Ottawa. Besides, she's asking us to go to the movies with her. I don't think she's the kind of girl I should be interested in. Or you either,
Zach replied, rather resentful of Jake's interest in Melissa and feeling a little concerned for his brother's well-being.
Do you really want to get pummeled by Shane? Shane's out of the picture. Maybe, and maybe not.
Pulling the phone from his pocket, Jake sat up in bed. While Zach seemed to be disengaging from his pursuit of Melissa, Jake's plans were revolving around her more intensely every day. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Had he been at Bible camp that summer, he might have realized he was setting up an idol in his heart. He might have considered positively pursuing the opposite.
Hey, Melissa, what's up?
He texted. Not much, was the instant response.
So when's our movie date?
Friday night?
Sounds good.
Is Zach coming?
No, he'll be doing his Bible study instead.
What?
Zach has changed in a major way.
Can you give him a message from me?
Sure.
Jake shared the message that came in for his brother. Zach, what's with you? I hardly hear from you anymore. Colorado is a fabulous movie. You can't miss it. Please be there tomorrow night. Love, Melissa. Zach tried to read the previous messages, but Jake snatched it away.
What did you tell her?
Zach wanted to know.
I just made a movie date for Friday night. She wants to know if you're coming. And what are you going to tell Dad?
Zach questioned, knowing just as well as Jake did that their parents would not be impressed with such a date.
I don't know.
Jake fumbled irritably.
Maybe I'll say I'm going to see Jaden for a few hours. So you'll lie.
Jake looked perplexed.
I'll come up with something, man. It might not be an outright lie. But why are you worried about lies? You lied about prom and about... Yeah, but that was before I realized I needed to change my life.
At that moment, Jake heard his mom calling his name. He left to see what it was that she wanted. Zach sighed and rested his chin on his hand, wondering what he should do. It was very tempting to join his brother for a movie date.
But I'm trying to change my life,
he thought.
A date with Melissa could set me back in a major way. What if she gets all cuddly? And I'd have to lie to Mom and Dad, which I don't want to do anymore.
His eyes focused in on the white rock that sat on his desk, his treasure from the shipwreck. He picked it up and examined it carefully. Jake returned in a few minutes with a laundry basket of clean clothes.
Tell Melissa that I'm sorry, but I have other plans for Friday,
Zach said.
I really don't think you should be going either,
he told his brother earnestly.
Melissa's beautiful, she's charming, and she's wild. For guys who want to do what's right, she's not going to be helpful at all.
Jake was amazed his brother was finally admitting what they both knew well.
I can't believe Zach isn't interested in a date with Melissa,
he thought with astonishment.
He really must not be interested in her anymore.
Sitting down in his bed to text the message that Zach wasn't coming, Jake was elated.
He's giving her up, right when she's showing interest. This just might work in my favor.
With a smile, Jake lay on his bed, imagining his movie date with Melissa, while Zach quietly filled in a study chart comparing Job's 3 friends. Hearing their parents call out goodnight as they headed to bed, Jake pulled out the laptop that he kept carefully hidden away.
Zach's been working for quite a while,
he considered.
I wonder if he'd watch a movie with me now.
In the past, they'd done everything together. Zach had always been a willing partner in crime. This turnabout was driving Jake crazy.
Think you'd have time to watch a movie with me?
Jake asked. Zach hesitated.
I was hoping to do another hour on Job,
he replied.
And then we need to get some sleep so we can get up for work in the morning.
Jake noticed the hesitation. The monster wanted company.
Okay, well, I'm going to watch one. I'll keep the earplugs in so I don't disturb your study.
Picking up the laptop, Jake settled himself comfortably against his pillows and turned it on. He looked through the selection of movies, wondering what might interest his brother. He remembered his first introduction to R-rated movies.
If I could get Zach to watch just one with me, maybe he'll find them just as addictive. Then maybe he'll be normal again. I feel bad watching the stuff when Zach's sitting there studying his Bible.
He looked at the list carefully.
Perhaps I should show him Hellrider. Hey, Zach,
he called out.
Have you ever heard of Hellrider?
Turning around, Zach asked.
Oh, what's it about?
Jake told him selected parts of the storyline.
It has the best cop chase ever. You gotta see it sometime. The stunts this guy does on his motorbike are unreal. You'll love it.
Curious, and feeling badly for turning his brother down so many times that evening, Zach got out of his chair and came over to steal a peek. Starting the movie, Jake said,
Just watch the first scene. It starts with him practicing his stunts on the track. It's so cool. One scene won't take long,
Zach assured himself.
It does sound cool, and I've already worked for an hour on the study. Besides, Jake really thinks I'm becoming a fanatic. Maybe if I just show a little interest in the movie, he'll stop bugging me so much.
Taking the pillows off his own bed, Zach made himself comfortable beside his brother. He was awestruck by the stunts and mystified by the cop's intense pursuit of Lance, the motorcycle rider.
Why do they want to catch him so badly?
He wondered.
Does Lance hold some deadly secret? Has he been framed by someone else? Are the cops corrupt? Just 10 minutes more,
he told himself a couple of times.
This is cool.
Then suddenly, right in the middle of the most exciting chase, the scene flashed to a darkened motel room where a cop was questioning Lance's girlfriend. Zach was astonished when she started taking off her clothes.
Jake, what's the rating on this? Don't worry, Brett has it,
Jake assured him.
This is the only bad part, and you've got to hear what they say. It's so important. You'll never figure out the plot otherwise.
Zach's eyes were transfixed by the scene, but his heart was racing. He heard a noise in the hall and wondered if his mom was up.
What if Mom comes into our room right now and sees what we're watching? She'll be so upset. Dad would never allow stuff like this in the house. They'd be so disappointed, especially after I've told them I've changed.
But it was so hard to tear his eyes away.
Jake, we shouldn't be watching this,
he complained weakly.
You should skip it. You missed it,
Jake said reproachfully, backing up the movie so the whole heart-racing scene began from the start.
You've got to listen to what they say.
Inside, Zach's conscience was telling him that this was bad, that he shouldn't be watching such scandalous scenes. But another part of him was totally enthralled. He'd never seen anything like this before. The new possibilities being suggested made his heart race.
If Brett owns this DVD,
he told himself,
then obviously Brett thinks it's okay. And I'm not baptized yet,
he assured himself.
I haven't really made a commitment to God.
Zach missed the crucial words for the second time and didn't complain when his brother skipped back to watch the whole heart-racing scene again. From that point on, Zach lost all willpower to tear himself away from the movie.
I have to find out what happens. I'll do extra study tomorrow night.
Jake smiled inwardly.
This is more like it. Zach's enjoying this with me.
He was introducing his brother to a new brand of excitement, and he was sure his brother would become just as quickly addicted as he had been. Jake had told Zach that there was only one bad scene, but he hadn't been entirely truthful. There were others, and Jake kept repeating,
Oops, I forgot about this.
As Zach allowed himself to watch, he told himself,
I'll never, ever do anything like this again. This is a one-time indulgence. I've just got to see how it ends. But Dad always says that the best defense is never to give in for the first time. Oh, just this once. Dad says once you've broken down your first line of defense, you're more easily overcome the next time. Oh, the first defense is already broken. I might as well finish this off.
When the movie ended, somewhere near midnight, Zach was just as awake and wired as if it had been the middle of the day. He tossed and turned for some time in bed, feeling ashamed for the direction his thoughts were going. His lusts were ignited by the images now burned into his mind. One part of him yearned to dwell on the scenes, while the other was disgusted to have them in his head. It was such a paradox.
I should have asked Jake what the rating was,
he thought regretfully.
I never thought he would suggest watching stuff like this. What's with Jake? I'm surprised Brett owns this movie. I should have walked out after that first bad scene. Then I wouldn't have so much of this in my head.
He thought about praying to God for forgiveness, but he felt too ashamed to even begin to approach God when so many impure thoughts were swirling around inside. Only 3 days ago he'd asked to be baptized, promising his dad that he was ready to stop serving sin and give his life to God. Now he had just invited sin into his heart through the lust of the eyes, and it didn't want to leave. Unable to sleep, Zach finally left his room and went outside for a walk. Jake was sound asleep. A muggy night, it was peaceful and quiet down near the bay. The moon was a bright half-crescent, and the sky was filled with stars. He looked up at the heavens and remembered the beautiful evenings at Manitoulin. With all the light pollution in Stirling, he could only see a small fraction of the heavenly host.
I wish I were back at camp,
he thought,
where there weren't so many distractions and strong pulls in the opposite direction.
Zach wandered down to the harbor front. He didn't feel one bit weary physically, but mentally he was exhausted. Walking along the boardwalk, he tried to determine what he should do. He longed to talk to someone about the way he was feeling, but didn't know if anyone would understand.
Dad won't have any sympathy,
he decided.
I hate to think what the consequences will be if Dad ever discovers that laptop. Who can I talk to about this? I wonder if Uncle James ever watched such movies. He wasn't always a believer. But Uncle James is still really sick. I can't talk to him.
Standing beside the ocean, listening to the waves surging against the tall wooden piers, Zach thought about the talks he'd heard at Manitoulin. He remembered Uncle George talking about idols of the heart and how they refused to go away.
But there is a more aggressive method to overcome idols in the heart,
Uncle George had assured them.
Be not overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Positively pursue the opposite.
Zach looked around. There was no one else in sight. Kneeling on the wooden planks, he bowed his head and prayed.
Heavenly Father,
he began nervously,
I hardly feel I can come before you tonight. Please forgive me for filling my mind with those images. I knew it was wrong. I knew I should have stopped myself, but I didn't. I'm struggling to escape from these thoughts. They are raging within me. Please, Father, help me to overcome. Help me to be strong against the flesh and to commit my life to you fully in baptism as I've planned to do. And please, Heavenly Father, help me to help my brother. I realize the force of this evil to tear us both away from loving you and your righteousness. You are holy, and you want us to serve you in holiness. What I watched was the opposite of all that you are. Please strengthen me. Please strengthen both of us to overcome. In Jesus Christ's name.
Zach prayed earnestly.
Amen.
Walking home, Zach felt fortified, even though the tantalizing images still pulled at his heart.
Overcome evil with good
was a verse that kept coming to mind. There was no way he would be able to sleep, not yet. Tiptoeing into his room, he looked reproachfully at his brother, sleeping soundly in bed.
Why would you knowingly invite me to do wrong?
He whispered. Picking up his workbook, he was reminded of the way Job's 3 friends had been even more effective at bringing Job low than all the afflictions heaped upon him from God.
Jake,
he mused,
you've become like a Satan to me.
Walking out of the room, Zach felt his self-righteous indignation had suddenly been turned upside down. A panicky feeling washed over him.
I used to give Jake such a hard time about every spiritual choice he made. I used to go on and on about all the fun I was having away from God. Was I a Satan to him? Were my actions responsible for where he's at now? I need to help my brother.